Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me today for the Teen Anxiety Maze. What is the science of hope? Have you ever wondered what that is actually about? Well, along with improving mental health, hope increases our self esteem, and studies suggest that increasing hope can improve symptoms and daily functions, even of chronic illnesses. So it definitely helps to promote hope in our lives. So today I have Sara Stockwell with me as a guest, and she has more than 20 years of experience in public education and mental health advocacy, having served as the director of student services and well-being, executive director of pupil services, and a school psychologist. She offers a unique perspective on mental health and education. As the leader of Wellbeing Labs at Patel for Kids, Sara specializes in curating research and facilitating professional learning on critical topics such as hope, resilience, well-being, and trauma-responsive practices in education, with the goal of fostering environments where both youth and adults can thrive. So I am so excited to have Sara here. I love educators and I love mental health, all the things, and you are all of those wrapped into one. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, for having me today. I'm grateful to be here. Obviously, this is a very critical topic for all of us. And I had a chance to listen to your podcast myself and was just impressed with your ability and really admirable work, the people that you've had on and supporting youth and families and educators. So thank you for having me here today.
Thank you. I always say that I have dedicated my entire life to youth, and it's so true because I started teaching at age 22, which is that beginning of your adult life, and I have never stopped working with youth this entire time. So it's definitely the love, and I it's so important, and I want kids to grow up in a beautiful world and environment where we're all worried about and taking care of those things. So tell us a little bit about what got you into this education, mental health role.
Yeah, so I would say it started back growing up myself. I experienced, unfortunately, a lot of trauma as a child, and we moved a lot, so we're really transient. I would spend sometimes only a semester at a time in school, and I missed school a lot because I had anxiety. So I remember my symptoms starting around the age of 18, or sorry, 8. I had my first panic attack, and by 14, I was actually diagnosed with OCD. So I remember
Mm.
just feeling very kind of alone as a child, like what's wrong with me? I didn't really understand my symptoms and my feelings. And I thought as an adult, had I known and had the strategies, I probably wouldn't have at 17. I started having suicidal thoughts and wondering if I could go on in living this way. And so I think learning those strategies and bringing those to schools, to young people, is incredibly important. And I've dedicated my life to that as well. I also have children who have anxiety, social anxiety, health anxiety. And I remember as a parent, the hardest day of my life was when I had to take my child to school and he was hanging onto my leg and crying and just begging me to stay there with him. He was having a panic attack and I had to walk away. And it broke my
Hmm.
heart leaving
Yeah.
him there. So at that point I started thinking about this commitment to, teachers and educators and parents and all of us having the information that we need to best support our young people. And then obviously working in the schools and working with students with incredibly significant challenges, they turned to us, to educators for help. And the gravity of that is not lost on me. I think we can't solve the mental health crisis in schools. We know that 1 in 6 youth will experience mental health, but we can certainly, as schools, be partners in that. And I think we can be a source of hope and healing as educators. So that's kind of what led me to where I am today.
Yes, I love that so much. Well, at the beginning, I talked about the science of hope.
Yeah.
So that's something that you are teaching. And I think you're teaching educators about how to do it, but also teaching youth about it. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so at Batal for Kids, we actually have a series. We have series for families and communities where we provide them kind of training on what hope is, hope and resilience paired together. And then we do coaching in between that. And then we also have a series for educators. And really, so the science of hope, we often think of hope as something very informal. I hope you have a good day. I hope you're doing well.
Mhm.
But there's actually 30 years of research on hope that there's about 2,000 studies alongside, it's positive psychology, it's neuroscience, educational psychology. And it's really this idea of three things. It's goals, pathways, and agency. And it's this idea of, I believe that my future will be brighter, so I have some optimism. I can have a plan to do that, right? I have a plan and I have alternate ways. I know life's going to throw me a curveball, so I can then have a
Mhm.
plan to adapt and be flexible. And then the most important part is your belief in yourself. So your agency, right? Do you believe that
Mhm.
if you put in the effort and you do the things that you can impact your life? And so we've actually taken the science of hope and resilience and combined it into four areas. And so I won't go through all of them, but I'll just give you a couple examples and for our listeners today. So one of those is charting your course, right? So do you have future goals? Do you have wishes and dreams that are meaningful to you? Do you have plans for your future? Do you believe that your situation will get better, right? So if you think about
Mhm.
that in the context of anxiety, like what are the small goals that you can set for yourself? And do you believe that you can make that better? Another one is master your mind. And that's really, really important for anxiety, right? That's really powerful in building hope. So, do you understand your thinking patterns? Do you understand your feelings and emotions? And can you regulate those in the face of adversity or in the face of challenge? Yeah, and that just really kind of gives us some of that power to over our anxiety rather than us feeling like it control us, and it builds our confidence. So in schools, we don't have to be counselors. As parents, we don't have to be counselors to practice these strategies, and that's one of the goals of the work that we do.
Mm, I love that. Well, one of the things that I really educate my clients about is that everyone has anxious thoughts. Like there's nothing wrong with them. This is one of the thousands of emotions that we can have. And anxiety is actually in our bodies for a reason, and that it's there to protect us from things that we might need to be anxious about. But most of the time, when we're not going to school or when we're, not learning to drive or not asking people on dates or all the things that teens feel anxious about, and then they just stop their life because they feel that feeling. I just talked to them about sometimes some people's alarm system inside their body goes haywire and is not working correctly and makes things too uncomfortable and hard to do when other kids don't experience quite as much alarm. And sometimes, well, always trauma and abuse and things like that kind of trigger that to go higher than someone else. But so, because it's normal to feel anxious sometimes or to have anxious thoughts, it's really hard for kids and families to decide, okay, is this a normal situation that's going on, or is this a problem that we need to take care of? And what is your advice for parents and teens and schools? Like, how do they differentiate between the two things of this is what everyone goes through and this is a problem?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I'm so glad that you asked that because this is a challenge for everyone, as you mentioned,
Hmm.
and it shows up differently in every person, right? So
Hmm.
your child may be experiencing irritability, maybe you see perfectionism, maybe they're beginning to withdraw. My child started showing physical symptoms, more headaches and stomach aches. Students that I've worked with have just become really kind of angry or aggressive. And so I kind of live by this rule of ask the questions, right? So rather than
Hmm.
assume or wonder, like let's ask the questions and you'll be really amazed at what you uncover. Sometimes youth don't have the vocabulary to really explain it. So I love using something called a 3-point check-in. And what this does is it really just opens the dialogue for the adults in the situation. And so I use a head, heart, body. And so I talk about
Hmm.
like what thoughts are coming up for you? What questions are you asking yourself? Are you kind of stuck on a certain thought? That's our head. And then our heart is what feelings are coming up. How are
Hmm.
you feeling? What emotions are coming up? And sometimes for younger children, I'd use pictures, right, to help them maybe
Hmm.
point to the pictures to describe it. And then your body, what sensations are in your body, and giving them some of the language. Are your palms sweaty? Is your heart racing? Are your legs jittery? And that not only helps the adult to begin to just kind of dig into, okay, what we see on the surface as these, what we would call behaviors,
Hmm.
underneath, is there anxiety there, right?
Hmm.
It also helps the youth, the child, or the teenager to begin to build awareness. I can tell you I did not have early intervention in terms of counseling, and it took me a very long time to understand what was going on in my body.
Hmm.
So that's really, really important. I would also say get them connected, right, with a mental health professional, whether that be a school
Yeah.
counselor, or a school psychologist, or a clinical. The average delay from the time a person has symptoms to when they get treatment is actually 11 years. And so over
Mm,
that time, we can see it get worse and worse, and then it's harder to treat, right?
mm,
So I would say that would be another big piece is get professional opinion if you're not sure, because it can't do any
mhm,
harm. If anything, it's going to help. So that would be my recommendation there. And then the other piece I would just say is anxiety is rooted in fear and uncertainty. And so throughout this whole process, just really creating safety and support, right? We innately
mhm,
want to feel loved and supported and cared for. We've all, whether we have anxiety or not, we've all had experiences where we have fear, right?
mhm.
And
Yeah.
so fear is normal, as you said, anxiety is normal, as you said. And it's when it becomes, I don't want to say debilitating, but when it becomes so much that it's overwhelming and it's beginning to interfere, you're
Mhm,
avoiding going places, right? You're withdrawing from people. That's when
mhm.
I think that having that extra professional support is really important.
Yeah, I always describe it to kids as paralyzing because it's like it's just like they can't make the next step. They can't do the next thing because of that fear or just how uncomfortable it feels. And I have not experienced a panic attack, but I know my daughter has, and I experienced lots of other people's panic attacks when I was in school in the school setting, and it just feels so terrible to them that they can't imagine that there's not something wrong. Like, and yes, there's something wrong in the fact that the alarm system is going off in the wrong for the wrong reasons or too intensely for what the situation needs, but it's still, I mean, it they just can't understand like there's got to be something wrong with me. Why would I feel like this? So I spend a lot of time normalizing, feeling uncomfortable because we're going to feel uncomfortable and we have to figure out. And I think that's kind of like hope. Like, hope doesn't say nothing bad's ever going to happen or you're going to be happy every day of your life. It says that when things are scary or sad or just challenging in some way, I know that there's a better thing that's going to happen. I know that I'm going to get out of this and I'm going to move on to something more exciting. And so I talk a lot about even when you feel really uncomfortable, get up and go to school anyway, and go to the job interview anyway, and ask the person on a date anyway, because that's going to help your brain realize, oh, this isn't life and death. This isn't going to
Yeah.
kill me if I go to school. This isn't going to kill me if I choose to do this, things that are not life threatening, though our body is saying it's life threatening. So,
Yes. Especially the panic attack, right? People
yeah.
think I'm dying, and you don't die from
Mhm.
panic. You feel like that. You certainly feel
Yes.
like that in your brain. But yeah, I think
Hmm.
you make an important point, which is this isn't permanent. Your body
Yeah.
can't physically stay in this state permanently, right? And so it
Hmm.
will pass. And how do
Hmm.
you kind of help yourself through that until it passes?
Hmm.
And that is the hope piece, right? If you know, like, okay, this is not going to last forever, and this
Hmm.
will end, and there's strategies I can learn to help myself cope as it, then certainly, yeah, you feel more hopeful versus
Hmm.
I'm going to feel like this forever. This is never going to stop, right? Those are two very different mindsets.
Oh, definitely. Well, I know when you were talking about it takes 11 years to get that help or to have a diagnosis or whatever. I know my daughter had anxiety and she says, I think her first panic attack was at 7 or 8. And I didn't even know it. And I didn't know it until it was this year in 2024. She and I recorded a podcast together, mother and daughter, talking about anxiety. And she said it on that podcast. And I'm like, what are you even talking about? Like, I didn't even know that. Like, I knew about her panic attacks when she was in college because I was leaving my house and going to her, trying to help her because it was so extreme. And that's when she was diagnosed when she was in college because she was like, something is wrong. Like this, I should not be feeling like this all the time. And I always had excuses for it. And I feel so bad as a mental health professional that I didn't realize that it was anxiety, but I could always, pin it to something else. And so that's, one of the things that I've kind of told those stories to the people that, my listeners or whatever, they kind of know that I struggled with this because I mean, no parent wants to say, "Oh, my child has anxiety." And I wasn't really trying to avoid it. Like if when she did get diagnosed, I'm like, well, thank goodness. I'm so glad that we have something we can go from here. And like, why is this so why are some things so challenging? And she started taking medication, which was the best thing ever. And I mean, everybody has to do their own thing, and some people do fine without it. But she needed something to turn that volume down. And once that happened, she's been so much better. So that I have a lived experience because I don't experience anxiety in that way where it paralyzes me or stops me from doing things. And so I just was telling her all the things that work for me, which didn't work for her. Like, well, just stop thinking about it. We'll just, go read a book or, like trying to get her to like stop focusing on it. And she was like, I can't stop focusing on it. And that's when we realized what was really going on. And you mentioned an OCD diagnosis, and I didn't realize how connected those that can be. But just last week, I talked to, I had a podcast interview with someone who is an OCD specialist. And so she was talking about those connections. And it was fascinating to me because I was like, oh my gosh. And I had a client that is in college and she was having some just really intense, intrusive thoughts.
Mhm.
And it got to the point where she was like crying on the Zoom call to me and saying, I don't know what to do. Like these are starting to scare me. Like I don't want to do the things that they're saying, but they're just like I can't stop thinking about it. And I said, I think you need to see your campus, go to your campus clinic and talk to somebody. And she was diagnosed with, I think it was like stress induced or something like that, stress induced OCD. Or, I mean, it was like an interesting diagnosis I hadn't heard of before, but it totally explained what was happening. And like, she is so much better. I'm like, oh, thank goodness that
Yeah,
got that extra help for that. So, there's always hope, no matter if, your kid's already moved on and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I think something's going on. You can be diagnosed at any time and you can get help. So if you do have kids that have already moved on and you're still kind of worried about what's going on, there's always a chance that you can find out what the answer is and start, making steps towards it. And I also tell parents that if therapy or mental health is kind of a scary, I don't want it to be scary for people anymore, but if it is feeling like that towards you or your child is like, I'm not talking to them, I don't, I'm not crazy or whatever the things that they think, you can always go to your pediatrician or family doctor and just do a physical, because sometimes there are physical reasons why people are being triggered physically with different things. And so I mean it doesn't hurt to try that out, and it's also sometimes easier for the child to be like, "Oh, the doctor." Like of course I go to the doctor. Or sometimes it's easier for a parent to feel like, "Well, I'll try the doctor first." And they also know who to refer you to if they have a different idea of what's going on. So,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
I always say too, don't be afraid to ask for help because it isn't a sign of weakness. It's a
Mm.
sign of strength.
Yeah.
People go to all kind. I mean, they might talk to their coach first. They might talk to a
Mhm.
pastor first. It might be a neighbor, but there's people all around you, right? Because it can be scary, and especially if someone has intrusive thoughts around OCD and
Mhm.
those types of things, or their anxiety is so intense that they feel like I'm not going to make it. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
Anybody that are your people, right? Who are the reliable people in your circle, in your community that you can turn to? Maybe it's a sibling, maybe it's a cousin, a friend, but
Mhm.
someone to then help you, right? Then take that next
Mhm.
step. So,
Yeah, and for parents to not feel bad if you're not the first person they talk to,
yeah.
because I think, well, just like me finding out she had a panic attack when she was 8 and she's 34 now, and I just found out about it, I'm like, what?
Yeah.
But
My
she
parents
said,
will probably find out about my first panic attack from this podcast. I am
well,
certain
and
they do
yeah,
not know that that happened at 8 years old.
yeah. Well, because there's so much with your parents when you're little. And I was as open and, I was a safe space. I was all the things. But she said, Mom, I thought I was crazy. And I wasn't even ready to say that out loud
Yeah.
for even myself to think about that something's wrong with me. And she said, I just didn't want to, that's too scary to even talk about. So if your kids, they could be experiencing some things that you don't even really realize. But I feel like mother's intuition, you kind of have like something's not quite right here, and I don't know for sure what it is. And I remember having all of those thoughts, but like always finding something, some excuse about it. Like, oh, well, this happened, or oh, I think she's allergic to red dye, or I think, like I had all these. And we even went to the doctor because she threw up every day for 1 year.
Mm.
And so we had done like checking her stomach and checking her esophagus and making sure that everything was working okay. And they were like, oh, everything's fine. I'm like, okay. And I made her go to school. I remember we'd drive to school sometimes. She'd throw up out the door, and then we'd just keep on going and still go to school because she wasn't sick, like physically ill. She was just experiencing her body's reaction to whatever was going on. So,
Yeah.
well, what else would you like her families to know about?
Well, I think what you just said, I think that's an important point in schools a lot of times. So as a school psychologist and, working with youth that had mental health needs, we would often see kind of school refusal or they pull up and we'd have to help them out of the car, and that was always so hard on parents. It's hard on the child,
Mm-hmm.
it's exhausting, right? And it's hard on the
Mm-hmm.
parents.
Mm-hmm.
But we always try to encourage them to kind of move through that anxiety and not avoid it, because what we
Mm-hmm.
know, what the research tells us, what mental health tells us, is that when we avoid it, we actually build the wrong muscle. For
Yes.
children, I always say, if you lift weights, you build your bicep muscles. Well, if you practice kind of going through that anxiety, even though it's hard, right? It's hard and
Mm-hmm.
it's scary and it's challenging, but you're building your brain muscle to be able to better manage that. So eventually it gets easier and it gets easier and it's easier.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really hard. I know personally, having gone through it as a child, and I know personally having gone through it as a parent and as a school psychologist, that it's hard for everybody. But to really think about that and just find ways to calm yourself and help your child feel supported and loved through that, even though
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be hard. So thank
Yeah.
you for bringing that up. I think another important point I wanted to make was, and maybe this is more directed towards teens, is that you have more control than that you think you do. And
Mm-hmm.
so anxiety, I think you'd mentioned your daughter said, "Oh, I felt crazy," right? Anxiety can make us feel weird. It can make us feel alone. It can make us feel judged because we're acting in ways that maybe don't align with what we want to, but that's how that's how we're reacting. And so just knowing that, you really do have the ability to what we call master your mind at Battelle for Kids, but it's
Mm-hmm.
really understanding your symptoms, your anxiety, and then putting the strategies in place. There's so many different strategies out there. And I remember feeling overwhelmed because everyone would give me something new. Try this,
Yep.
try this, try this. And I felt really overwhelmed and I thought, well, none of these are working. This is never going to work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be stuck here forever.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just encourage practice and build the biggest toolbox. And this is for parents too. Build the biggest toolbox that you possibly can, because what works one day isn't going to work the next. I mean, that's that way with
Mm-hmm.
anything, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
just keep trying and practicing when you're not in a state of panic or when you're not in a very, very escalated state, because it's much harder to access then. I
Mm-hmm.
always would say it's like never playing football and then expecting to go to the Super Bowl and throw the winning touchdown, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if you don't practice in that moment, it's probably not going to work for you. And
Yeah.
so yeah, just come up with lots of different strategies and practice those, practice those. I do have to give a plug for mindfulness. I found mindfulness later in life, but it has really been life changing for me personally. And what I know when I practice 5 minutes a day, it helps me
Mm-hmm.
understand my thoughts. It helps me understand the feelings in my body that I'm getting from my thoughts. And I do feel that I have much more the ability to kind of break some of those thoughts and reframe them and get myself
Mm-hmm.
out of that place before it escalates to really, really significant anxiety. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm speaking very vulnerably. I'm 46 years old and I still, right? Anxiety doesn't just go away. Typically, OCD doesn't go
Yeah.
away, but you can. And I hope this brings a little bit of hope, is that, you can take action on it. You do have more control than you think. And
Mm-hmm.
it won't stay that way forever. So,
Yes. I do know. I remember I had one client one time during our consult, are we going to work together? And she said, I just want to get rid of it. And I said, well, there is the bad news that you learn to manage it, but it doesn't go away. And, but again, I feel like I do a lot of education on that. If you think about it, we don't want anxiety to go away
Right.
because then we're not going to have any boundaries or gauge of how we should be acting because we're not worried about anything and we're walking off a cliff or we're,
Right.
walking in front of a car or whatever. We're doing all these things that really would hurt us. And so we just have to learn that we have to train our brain with that agency that we have with the practicing of things and going to school when we don't feel like it because that's telling our brain, oh, school is not life or death. School is there's something about school and we can work on that, but that going to school is not what our body is trying to make it out to be,
Yeah.
and we just have to work through that. So I love that you're doing that work too, that we need all the people doing this work
You
because
need
it's
all the people.
so
Yeah.
important. And I'll put all of your information in the show notes so people can send you a message or ask any questions about the things that you do and also look up more about the Patel for Kids and like how could they maybe get that to their school if they're wanting to do some of those things or wanting their school to do that. I know I've had clients that have said, can you come to my child's school and teach them this stuff? And so you're doing the same thing. And that's really important for our schools to be doing that. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, yes, definitely.